Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of After Wednesday. I am your host, Jeffrey Hayes. So good to be back with you this week. It's the first day of spring, although I know not so everywhere based on the news I was reading this morning. For those who have snow, I am very sorry. Hopefully it will thaw out soon. Although I was in DC not too long ago, and that was the coldest I've been in quite some time. I live in the South, like the deep South, so it takes an adjustment sometimes when you get off the plane and go, oh my God, why is everything so frozen? But I have survived and thawed out, and hopefully everyone else will get the opportunity to thaw out as well. Welcome everyone this evening. If you're tuning in tonight on Google Plus, I have enabled the question and answer app, so you should be able to type questions if they come up in your mind for my guest tonight. And my guest tonight, I'm so thrilled she could take time out of her very busy schedule to be here, is Jennie Wood. How are you doing tonight, Jennie?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I have to start by asking tonight about your picture. Is that you with the guitar?
Yes, it is. It's that is me with my Fender Strat, which is still my favorite guitar after all these years. It's a Lone Star Fender Stratocaster with the double humbucker pickup, so it's got that really nice thick sound. And when I first bought it, I was madly in love, and I still am, with the guitar sound of Stevie Ray Vaughan and his playing. Yeah. And I had this mad desire to sound as close as I could to it. And I have really tiny fingers. So I went out and attempted to get the extra thick strings that he would play with, and there's just no way. I mean, I just shredded my fingers. But to this day, I still play with the guitar pick upside down. That's how I just play strum guitar, and that is directly from him. That's what he did to get a thicker. It's another way he got that thick sound. I mean, whenever I'm in a bar and one of his songs is on the radio or the jukebox or stereo, I still get goosebumps.
Do you do are you more of a downstroke player, or are you able to sort of vary?
I vary. I mean, there's that great like indie rock, punk rock strum that Bob Mould does, where it's like a machine gun. Like, you know, he's another one of my favorites. So like that's probably my favorite thing to do. You know, it took a while to master that and sing at the same time, but I've always loved when, you know, guitarists can just walk on stage and play that guitar like a machine gun, you know.
I was really thrilled on a road trip recently with my wife. I put Zen Arcade in the CD player, and she had never heard it. And
wow.
Yeah, I was just like, oh, this is happening now. So she was blown away.
Always so great to introduce someone to Husker Du. There's actually a reference to Zen Arcade in Flutter Volume 2, which Jeff Lindsay and I are working on right now. And there's the two characters are in an argument, and I don't want to give spoilers away. And,
okay.
And one uses the example of how Zen Arcade was recorded in just 40 hours. The whole record was recorded in like 40 hours.
Yeah.
As a point in the argument. And so anytime I can get Husker Du or a Bob Mould reference in somewhere is great.
Yeah. The thing I enjoy about the liner notes for Zen Arcade too is they have to outline at some point. I think in the liner notes, I remember there being a note about, yes, there are 2 tracks. This song has been double tracked, which was a big free for all at SST at the time. Just like, what are you doing double tracking?
Right. So great.
And actually, we were pretty excited because just the other day, I live in Birmingham, Alabama, and we have a new music venue opening up, and the Dead Milkmen are coming. So we're going to get to see them. I just bought the tickets today, along with tickets to see Built to Spill. So I'm very, very, very excited about some shows coming up.
That's great. The last time I saw Built to Spill was Bob Mold.
Really?
Of course. Yeah, in a concert they did in New York about 5 years ago, maybe. Maybe longer. But yeah.
I apologize. My male cats have decided to use this time to yell at each other. But I want to transition, because you mentioned Flutter Volume 2, and I want us to get to that, of course, this evening. But I wanted to start tonight by asking you about your influences as far as writing goes. Your writing, as I was reviewing Flutter Volume 1 and I was reading A Boy Like Me and some of your other writing, your fiction writing showcases a real ear for dialogue and character. Were there specific influences on that, or is that just something that is sort of naturally how you write?
Well, my big, it's funny because I was just talking about this with a friend today about just how I think some of our biggest influences in writing are just authors we read when we were really young. And very early on, I got a hold of J.D. Salinger, and in particular, the book Franny and Zoe, not Catcher in the Rye.
Right.
I mean, I love Catcher in the Rye just like most other people, but Franny and Zoe is the book that I just fell in love with. And that story, usually I love epic stories, even in novels, and that story is so small. It's not a lot happens, but the inner landscape of those characters, and just how he creates this family and this very specific dialogue. And these are just such strong, dimensional characters, and they have a specific way that they talk and they think. And when you get to the end of that book, it couldn't have ended any other way with the characters doing anything else. But with A Boy Like Me, I really wanted to take just a character who wasn't that different from the guys I grew up with in the South. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina, and I was surrounded by uncles and male cousins and just men who struggled with communicating who they were and how they felt. And that could, just being very general, a male condition in and of itself. And I wanted to kind of just explore a character who's very uncomfortable in his skin, who was assigned the wrong gender at birth, who was walking around in the wrong body, and everyone thinks he's a lesbian, and he has these feelings for a girl who sees him, who sees who he really is, and then he has trouble communicating any of that, and playing around with the language or the lack of language.
Right. Yeah, so, I want to talk. Well, let me ask you this then. How do you? I agree with you about the male condition, and I think it's fascinating. I don't think men really engage in it, but I think that's a culture that comes from, especially as I'm from a very small town in the South, just south of Birmingham, Alabama, and I mean, we just never communicated when I was growing up, like me and my father. Like it was very stunted, and I'm curious as a man about why that happens, and I'm always affected when I see it in other people's work. Do you? Well, I'll segue. Let me ask you this then. Let's go back to Salinger. Have you seen the documentary on Salinger?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it was so fascinating because I was curious about how sometimes you just shouldn't know too much about the people you admire.
Exactly, and that exactly is why I haven't seen it, because we were discussing Bob Mould, and I love Bob Mould, but there's certain things in his memoir I didn't want to know, and I didn't want to read, and I just went through that with Kim Gordon's book. It's like sometimes you need to keep these people, because you love their work, and you don't always need to know every little detail of what's behind their work.
Um, what I'll switch another gear here. Was Flutter always meant to be for the comics medium, or did it start out as something else?
It actually started out for me as I was writing a short story and playing around. I wanted to tackle a novel and the challenge of writing that, and so I was playing around with that. But what happened with Flutter, which I started this before A Boy Like Me, and I was playing around with it as a short story just to kind of see if I could do it in prose, and it just felt very flat. It felt very static, and I wanted to kind of see the shape-shifting, and writers can describe that, but it just didn't feel like the right medium for it. So then I flipped over to doing it, working on it as a screenplay over teleplay, and I couldn't get the idea of just really bad special effects with the shape-shifting out of my head. And I know they've come a long way with special effects, but at the same time, I was reading a lot of different graphic novels. And the range in them was just crazy. I was reading Why the Last Man by the Brian K. Vaughan series. I was reading Fun Home. I was reading Craig Thompson's Blankets. And that's just such a wide range of graphic novels just right there. And there were other ones too. And I was like, wow, there's all these different stories being told in this way. And if you can just create a believable world and ground the characters in it, create real humans as, not just these characters, you can just do anything in this medium. And particularly Why the Last Man was a huge influence on me deciding to go in the direction with Flutter, because Why the Last Man is just this huge epic story, and it's just so wonderfully told, and so many strong women, and so the characters are three-dimensional, and it's funny, and it's epic, and yet it has emotional weight, and all the things that I was looking for at the time in any book, especially a graphic novel series like that. So that was what convinced me. I'm like, I'm going to try it as a comic. And I didn't know, I grew up reading comics, so I felt very comfortable with that, but I didn't know how to write it, and I didn't know how to find an artist. So I went to Grub Street, and they were doing just a very quick graphic novel comic writing class, and it's actually the class that I'm now teaching. This was like 5 or 6 years ago, and I enrolled in it, and I learned very quickly that a script format was evolving, and it's very similar to a screenplay, to a play, and those were things very familiar to me, and that's how Flutter evolved.
Now what you've learned in writing Flutter, as you had no previous experience really writing comic scripts, what has your script process for comics evolved? Like what does it look like now? Do you start with an outline, move it through that way to sort of a synopsis, sort of what's that process for you? Or what has that process become?
I still start working on a comic idea, especially a long form idea. Like I start any type of longer project, and I start with character bios. Character is really the first thing I start with, and I feel like the plot and motivations and things that move the story along come out of character. So I do a very long character bio, even for the supporting characters, so down to political beliefs and what's their favorite item of clothing, what's their most treasured possession, who's their closest relationship, birthday, and some of that stuff I never use, and some of it I forget. But that's what I start with, and then I just start doing a very rough scene outline because it's going to change. I come up with a pretty good idea of the ending, so I know where I'm going, and then I do a rough draft of the script. And what I loved about when I started working with Jeff McComsey is his enthusiasm for the project. And I think that for a lot of writers out there who are looking for someone to work with on their comic project, look for an enthusiast, someone who's like, yes, I want to work on this project. Because Jeff not only asked for all my notes and obviously the script, but he wanted to see all those character bios, pages and pages of stuff. And who knows if he read all of it? He wanted be it, you know?
Right.
I mean, I hope he didn't read all of it. It was a lot, but the fact that he wanted, you know, it's just, you want to look for a partner in any type of writing project who is just so enthusiastic and gets what you're doing, and because they're only going to elevate it and make it better.
I want to ask you some more about teaching writing. I've got the Grub Street website up for everyone to see. You teach writing. You just mentioned you now teach the class that you once attended. Sort of, how did that come about, and what do you find the most satisfying about teaching writing?
Just the same thing that Jorge Vega took the class, or taught the class that I took years ago. And what I love about him is what I love about my favorite teachers, and what I think the best teachers are just people who are so willing and just able to share all the information that they have. I mean, Jorge just gave us in that class that we took, and I'm still friends with people that I took that class with. He just gave us so much information, like everything he knew, the good, the bad, and the ugly about the comics industry, about writing comics, about working with artists, and just the whole process. He shared just everything. And so what I am doing is, you know, taking all of that and everything I've learned and everything I know and everything I know of, and just sharing that information and doing exactly what he did for me, which is put me on this path. I mean, he gave me all the tools that I needed: how to write a script, how to find an artist, how to collaborate, how to market, how to find publishers, how to deal with comic conventions, and all of that stuff. And so, since then, I've had my own experiences and different and all of that, and so I share that too. And so that's the thing I love is being able to pass along the information that was passed on to me, and give people the tools that I was given to get on my path.
You know, my background is in teaching. I have my bachelor's is in secondary education, English language arts. My master's is in it, and I'm working on a doctorate in it. And what you're telling me is basically the same prescription that you have. You not thought? Are you going to go back to school maybe at some point to pursue teaching?
I don't plan on it. I don't. You know, I love learning. I just anytime I'm at a writing conference, anytime I'm at a comic convention, and if I'm not, I love it when I'm not. I love exhibiting at a table, but if I'm not, I love going into panels. Anytime I can learn, I just love it. And it's just about passing on information. You get it, you pass it on to other people who can use it.
Well, you've got my vote. In case you're joining us a little bit late, my guest tonight is Jennie Wood. We're talking about the exciting teaching and teaching writing and getting excited about teaching, probably what no one was expecting this evening. But that's okay too. If you're tuning in tonight on Google+, the Q&A app is enabled. So if you have a question for Jennie, please feel free to type it, and I will be happy to ask her. Continuing on here, my next question for you is, and you touched on this a little bit, but I want to kind of revisit it. In your work, there are themes that seem very personal about isolation and longing for acceptance. And again, you nail this tone that comes with the pain of becoming. And has it been difficult, sort of, I guess, negotiating or these things as a writer? Or do you find yourself exploring more about yourself than you may have originally anticipated?
Well, I think that's part of it for a lot of writers, is you want to explore a question that's bothering you, or something that you're obsessing about, usually in a positive way. You don't always want to answer whatever that question is, because the readers don't really want you to answer. You just want to explore it.
Sure.
And with Flutter, it's obviously not this intimate personal story. It's not autobiographical in the sense that I can't shapeshift. There's no supernatural or sci-fi world in my life, in my head, but not in my daily life. But the idea of Lily thinking that her life would be easier or better if she were a boy, and that's why she shapeshifts to get this girl, that is a very much part of my teenage life in this small town, where I had my job after school at a movie theater, and I'd watch my guy cousins bring in their dates to the movies, their girlfriends, and I just wanted to be able to do that, and it was just not something that I could do at that point in time in the small town as a girl. So I would start imagining, and also, a lot of my, it's not just about sexuality and coming out. I mean, I couldn't even put words to that, and in that aspect, I can relate to the characters I write and them not being able to put words to it. But, part of it is that my cousins were older. They had cars, they had guitars, they were in bands, and so I wanted to be them.
Right.
And I was constantly around them, and so I saw the world through their male eyes, their male gaze. So I wanted to be them, and so all of that is in Flutter, and all of that is in her thinking that life would be better if she were a guy. And then, I grow up and realize guys have their own set of difficulties, and that's kind of her journey too, that we'll see more of. A boy like me was actually harder because I'm not a trans individual, and it's something that is really, really important to me. All the issues involving trans individuals in the trans community. It's something that means a lot to me, and so I wanted to do right by it. But what I wanted to do with Peyton, in A Boy Like Me, is explore a story that is completely different from mine. I am not someone who was assigned the wrong gender at birth. I'm not someone who's in the wrong body and having to communicate that and having that transition. So I wanted to, as a writer, the challenge of exploring that, and also just doing right by it. And, I'm not the only writer in the world who loses sleep over doing right by their story and their characters. So in that aspect, that was the hardest thing I've done to date.
You mentioned earlier about how males, you witnessed males growing up in North Carolina had difficulty communicating. And I'm curious, based on now that you travel around a little bit and you meet a lot of people and you encounter people in your writing classes and online through social media, and they're sort of communicating with you through your work. What is, if you could sort of take the temperature almost of misperception in this country having to do with how people view GLBTQ, what have you seen? What do you sort of, how have you gauged that? Is it better than what, say, for instance, the media represents? Is it worse, or is it sort of in the middle?
I mean, I think it depends on the context. The media likes to lash on the things, and they love this battle with same-sex marriage. But I think it's, in most cases, in my experience, and I can only speak to my experience, it's better than what's projected. That said, we still have a ton of work to do. I took Flutter to Appleseed Comic-Con, which is this great small comic convention in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I was there last May for it. And the reception there for it being an LGBT comic, and the reception toward me was wonderful. And that's a smaller audience, a smaller crowd, small town, but they were wonderful. And even just how much my friends have grown from the small town in North Carolina, and I know that my best friend in high school had serious issues with me coming out, and she's come a long way. And she won't mind me saying that, on the air. So, it is changing. The tide is changing. It's been a slow change. I think it's speeding up. There's still a long way to go. Especially in certain areas, the same-sex marriage debate still has a way to go. It shouldn't be a debate. We still got some work to do, and I think that's the danger of looking at it and saying we are further along than people think, and than the media projects, because we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. I don't want to assume anything. I'll just ask then about about that. Do a lot of young people reach out to you?
Yes, but you know what? It's not just young people. I had someone in his 60s reach out to me via email recently. Yeah. So I actually think older generations still have a harder time than younger generations. But yeah, I get a lot of people reaching out to me, just as much though questions about writing and how to get started in comics and and the whole indie publishing versus traditional publishing and agents. I get as much of that as I do anything LGBTQ.
I want to stay on, or I want to shift back to A Boy Like Me. Now I don't know if you wrote it originally with this in mind, or if this was something that came along during the editing, but of course it's classified as a young adult novel.
Right.
And YA literature has grown to be such a large, accessible genre for so many different age groups. So when you started thinking about A Boy Like Me, did you really ever think of it as a young adult novel, or did that evolve, or was it suggested?
It evolved over revision. The first draft I wrote of A Boy Like Me spanned 30 years in Peyton's life. So it was not going to be, or I wasn't thinking of it as young adult. I also wasn't thinking of it as a love story. I just wanted to take a character through his life until he became comfortable with his own skin. And I wanted to explore it through adulthood. But the more I revised it, and I did this, I also spent a year in a Grub Street class called the Novel Incubator. It's a year-long class. Grub offers it every year. And you enter that class, but you have to apply for it. If you get accepted, you bring in your manuscript and you workshop it and revise it all through that year. And over that time, I realized that really the meat of the story was the 4 or 5 years when he's from 8th grade to senior year, that period where he's figuring out how to name what he is, how to say what he is, figuring it all out. But that came through 2, 3, 4 drafts of revision. And even then, I wasn't thinking of it as a young adult novel. And one of the instructors towards the end of that year-long novel incubator class said, I think it's young adult. And I resisted it at first only because I didn't have it in my head. That's the thing. I think it's really important for writers to get out of the way of their own stories. You have to get out of the way of your idea and let it become what it's meant to be, whether in the beginning stages, it'll tell you, is it a novel? Is it a comic? Is it a graphic novel? And then as you're revising drafts, you still have to get out of the way of the characters and where they want to go, and get out of the way of the story and let it become, what it's meant to become.
What is it, as you have sort of thought about it now as a young adult novel? Did you like young adult novels beforehand, or did you not have a lot of exposure to them?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been drawn to things written about that. I mean, I think a lot of us are the coming of age, and because it's such an important time. And a lot of my favorite novels, if they were published today, whether it's To Kill a Mockingbird or Catcher in the Rye and Franny and Zoe, like we could argue. Franny and Zoe, I don't know, but a lot of these would be YA. I mean, that's that's out there. A lot of people have written about that. So books that I've been drawn to my whole life, can technically be considered or would be considered in today's publishing market YA.
Yeah. I my first encounter, when I try to think back about it, so many decades now back, so a lot of people, of course, say something like they read in school, like Hatchet or I Am the Cheese or even The Outsiders. But I think my first one was A Wrinkle in Time. If I could really categorize it, I would say that, definitely was A Wrinkle in Time. It just blew my mind. What, in your opinion? Well, I guess you were talking about how YA lit, and I completely agree with you. It's about coming of age, and that's such an identifiable thing for us all. And that's what I particularly like about also reading quote unquote young adult fiction. Now, I've had to teach young adult fiction quite a few times, so I ended up reading books I probably wouldn't normally have read, but when I came out the other end of it, it was such a nice feeling. Like, not because it was simple or anything, it was just because it was always communicated. Most of the books I read and taught were communicated so clearly and so well. And I think that's the greatest misconception about young adult novels when I read criticism of it, is that they think it's trite. And I'm like, no, it's really not.
Yeah.
Going back a little bit, I want to talk about or ask you about your comics influences. You talked about Why the Last Man having a really big impact, but what other comics before that? You said you were reading them when you were younger. What sort of had a great influence upon you?
Well, I was drawn to a lot of the superhero stuff because I grew up not only in a small conservative town, but my immediate family, my home life was pretty bad. My parents would argue every night. They both, I don't want to get, TMI, but I was always looking for an escape and escape from reality. And I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to superhero comics, even today. It's like something about those stories helped me, something about that fantasy world, that imaginary, this escapism helped me deal with the real world, my real life. And so it was just this great escape. So X-Men, the Hulk, anything, dealing with misfits, dealing with, I've never really thought about this until right now, but the Hulk and him losing his temper, it might have been a way for me to deal with my parents kind of exploding and arguing. Star Blazers, which was the Japanese anime, all my older cousins love that series, and they have these comic books based on that series, and so I would grab those and bring those home with me. So, all that stuff, all that DC Marvel, the comic world was part of, just as music and television, it was just part of my daily world, my daily escape.
What were you one of those, like so many of us, that got so fanatic about it early on that we were just like, oh, this writer wrote, like Grant Morrison wrote this, I want all Grant Morrison, or were you one of those people who sort of picked out certain artists and writers?
I was not, because I basically was at the mercy of cousins and friends around me and their friends, and like whatever comics they were just tossing out. So I would just grab them and bring them home and literally just look at them for distraction. So I was not that level of fandom. I wish that I was, but for me, I was just lost in the characters and the stories, and just basically grabbing whatever I could get my hands on, because there was not a comic store that I can remember. I mean, I don't even know where they got the comics. So I didn't have that access.
Right.
Which I'm kind of jealous of now. You can just get online and order everything.
I know, right? Like, it's crazy. I was reminiscing to someone the other day. I said, I remember, much like Frank Miller, who told his story about buying the first Batman comic. You know, he grabbed it off a spinner rack and he asked his mom, and he gives the story about how he fell into the cover or whatnot. It was kind of similar for me. I mean, I distinctly remember getting a Batman annual with a Neil Adams cover off a spinner rack at a Piggly Wiggly. And just being, it's the one, it's actually on a t-shirt now. It's the one where Neil Adams, it's the Batman annual with the Rogues Gallery. All the paintings are lined up along the wall, and it's still, I saw that shirt a few years ago and I freaked out. I said, no way. So yeah, I think it's so interesting. How do you feel about the shift to digital media? Is that how you prefer to read or create?
I think that, maybe it's the musician. I don't know what it is, but I like having the books in my hands. That is just a personal preference. The feel of the book. I like having them on my bookshelf. Eventually, that's going to have to end because I'll run out of room on the bookshelf. But I think that aside, my personal preference, I love the digital option. And I love it because there are people who can't get access to a bookstore or a comic store, or their small town has one, but they don't, they're not ready to explain why they want to buy this certain comic or that certain graphic novel. I mean, people who have bought Flutter in different countries all over the world, and they've done it online. So I don't think I don't know how accessible it would be otherwise. So for that reason alone, I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I don't. I've said it on the show a couple times, and we were talking right before the show about I interviewed 215 Inc.'s editor Michael Perkins. And we had a brief conversation about it, of course, and I ended up agreeing with him, although I am like you, I still like that feeling, that tactile feeling of comics and engaging with it that way because of who I am and sort of how I learn and also how I ingest information. The digital just seems it's not really always, it doesn't change the message, like, the message is going to be the same. If the story is good on paper or on digital, it's going to communicate.
Right.
So hopefully, some people still fight with that, but I let them have that. I let them have that one out. Let's shift. You mentioned at the top of the show that you have Flutter 2 news. What can you tell us?
Well, we're working on it right now, and we actually brought someone else into the team. We have a colorist working with us now, Paul Little. And the reason we're adding a colorist is we're working very hard, very quickly to get Flutter Volume 2 out this summer. And we want to debut it at San Diego Comic-Con. That's our goal.
Oh, wow.
I'll be there. So that's the West Coast debut, and I'll be there with it in the small press section. And then the East Coast debut will be Boston Comic-Con later in July. And then next month we'll be announcing more information of how everyone can get their hands on it, people who aren't going to be at those conventions, people who want to get it as soon as it's fresh off the presses. So I'll be announcing more details about that in the next month. I'm very excited about San Diego Comic-Con because this could be the last year it's there.
Oh, are they moving it?
That's the rumor. That's definitely. I mean, I know that's been a rumor for a while now, every year, but I'm hearing more rumbling than usual about it, like even more than in past years.
Well, we'll have to definitely keep our ear to the ground on that. But thank you so much for sharing. That's huge news. So everyone, look forward to that. Get your butts out to some cons and get this new edition, the new volume of Flutter. I want to ask you one last question, and we'll get you out on this. You teach writing, and you communicate a lot with people, but and you mentioned before that you get some emails, of course, about people want to know how to break in, quote unquote, break into comics or or write comics, what's sort of the best advice that you give them?
Well, I think it starts with really fleshing out your idea, making sure that you know the world of your comic, what you want it to look like, what kind of art you want it to be. Do you want, I mean, it took me a while in the pre-writing, the writing of the characters and the kind of outlining the story, to know that I wanted kind of this indie feel with the art, kind of an undercurrent and a very urban thing, and not the more flashy, and that's not a bad thing, but the brighter colors and the flashier world of like a superhero comic, like a major DC or Marvel type of feel to it. And it took a lot of writing. And it also took, another thing to start with that I think is really important is going to comic conventions and just looking at the different art in the artist alley and talking to the different artists and talking about their work. And that's a great way to find an artist for your project. And if you can't get to a Comic-Con, you can also do that online. There's a lot of great websites that artists display their work. And you can also reach out to them via social media. So that's a good starting point. And then, you know, when you do find an artist, looking for someone who's enthusiastic, looking for someone who's willing to do a lot of model sheets, rough sketches of your character, and that it's what you have in mind or better, and that just that enthusiasm from another person, because you want to work with someone who believes in your project, and the more you pour into it, the clearer, easier it's going to be to spot that person and for them to spot you. Just, those are the things that I usually pass on first.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Can you hang out a second while I wrap things up?
Yes. Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's great. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm blushing. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you, as always, for tuning in this week. Feel free to share the show via Google+, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. As always, you can subscribe, of course, to the YouTube page. After every show, the new episode will upload to the YouTube page, and also I will link it out to various social media out there in cyberspace, and I welcome everyone to do that as well. So the shows are usually available right away, or at least within 5 minutes once we're initially done. If you want to contact me on Twitter, you can do so at JLDPROD2002. If you want to follow and talk to Jennie Wood, and I highly suggest you do, she is at Jennie Wood Did. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, awesome. Again, thank you so much to Jennie Wood for joining us tonight. Thank you all so much for listening. We're back in 2 weeks. I believe, I don't want to be wrong, but I believe Michael Morrissey is here in 2 weeks. So we'll see then. Look for the blast out on social media from me about that. Until then, take care and be safe, everybody.